Okay, so this is our second video on problem solving with parabolas. So let's write this up here, problem solving with parabolas. So we're going to do two examples in this video. Example one. So in example one, I'll write out the question and then I'll run through so I'll write out the description and then I'll run through some questions about the description. But one thing I do want to say about this is that when it comes to problem solving is taking a real world situation and it's using mathematics that we know to find an answer. Now, we could find that answer without using parabolas a lot of the time, but it would take a lot of guessing and checking and guessing and checking and guessing and checking, and we may not be completely sure that we've found the best answer. So problems that we're about to go through are all about using a process with mathematics that we know to find the best solution the quickest way and to be sure that it's the best solution. So let's run through an example now. So a farmer owns 20 cows and wants to keep them in a paddock. Okay, so I want you to imagine you're a farmer, you own 20 cows, and you want to keep them in a paddock. Each cow requires a space of 10 square meters. In the paddock. To ensure there is enough grass. Alright, so here's the situation. A farmer owns 20 cows and wants to keep them in a paddock. Each cow requires a space of 10 square meters in the paddock to ensure that there is enough grass to eat for all cows. So basically, what that means is if there wasn't 10 square meters per cow, then there wouldn't be enough grass and they'd have to keep providing more food for the cows. Now, this is probably not a realistic number, but it's a number that we're going to work with. That's the situation. But how do you build a paddock? Well, you need to use fencing, and fencing costs money. And we don't just want to be spending, thousands of dollars more than we need to. We want to be spending exactly as much as we need to. There's a couple of things we need to look at. What shape paddock do we want? How much area do we need in total? How much money is it going to cost, and so on. So let's write this down. The paddock needs to be shaped like a rectangle. Okay, so we know the paddock needs to be shaped like a rectangle. So we're going to have, let's draw this. Let's draw this down here. We're going to have a rectangle. And we're going to have a length and a width. So this will be our length, this will be our width. Actually, let's do it the other way. Length and width. So we know our paddock needs to be shaped like a rectangle And we know the area that it needs to have. The area needs to be 20 cows and 10 square meters each. So the area has got to be equal to, let's write this here, area has got to be equal to 20 times 10, which is 200 square meters. All right, so that's the area. But then the next thing will be that the farmer decides, well, I don't want it to be too long. I don't want it to be too long this way because then I have to walk further, and I don't want it to be too long this way because then I have to walk further. So the farmer decides the length is 4 meters longer than the width. Then what's the crux of the question? Find the amount of fencing. Okay, so there's a number of things in this question. So what we're going to do is we're going to highlight the important information. So we know the area is here. Area is going to be 200 meters squared, and we know the length is 4 meters longer than the width. Okay, so we said our length is going to be this way and our width is going to be this way, so we're going to have to change it back to what I originally said because the length is longer, clearly. So this is our length, and it's equal to the width plus 4. Then we've got our width. So again, notice how our length is 4 meters longer than the width. So our length is the width plus 4. So that's important. Now, the next thing we need to look at is what we are being asked. What we're being asked is to find the amount of fencing required to build the paddock. How do we find the amount of fencing? Well, the fencing is all this perimeter. So we've got this and this. They are the same length because it's a rectangle. And then this and this, so the opposite sides, this side and this side, are also the same length because they're opposite each other. Notice how I labeled it with width plus 4. I don't want to use length and width. I just want to use one variable. The reason I want to use one variable is because it makes it easy to solve. So if I look at the perimeter, I can get a perimeter equation is equal to the width plus 4 plus width plus 4. Let's write this out. Let's put that in brackets to make it clear. And if I group that all together, I get this equation. Perimeter is equal to 4 widths plus 8. So that's the perimeter. That's the amount of fencing required. So I've got an equation for the amount of fencing required, but I still don't know how much fencing is required. In order to solve that, I actually need to go and work out how much fencing is required, because I know I've got width times by width plus 4 gives me my area. So let's look at an area equation. Area is equal to width times by width plus 4. And we also know that the area is 200. So we can write this down as equal to 200 meters squared. So this is our equation. Width times width plus 4 is equal to 200. Now, the way we solve this equation is going to determine a lot of different things. It's going to determine, well, it's basically going to determine our answer, but the process that we take to solve it is important. Now, you might be tempted to look at this and say, I know what that is. That's x-intercept form. and you would be wrong. And the reason you would be wrong is because in order to find our x-intercepts, or in this case our w-intercepts, we need to have a 0 on this side of the equation, and we don't. It's 200. So to solve this, we're going to need to expand the brackets and move all of the numbers onto the same side. So if we expand the brackets, we get w squared plus 4w is equal to 200. And then if we move the 200 onto the other side of the equation, w squared plus 4w minus 200 is equal to 0. Now we need to solve this. How do we solve that? Well, one way we can do it is completing the square, because we know how to do that. But we can look to start with and say, hang on a minute, we've got our y-intercept. Our y-intercept is negative 200. So we can gather from this y-intercept is equal to 0, negative 200. And we can also start to then complete the square. So we take the middle number, which in this case is 4. We divide it by 2, which gives us 2. And then we square that answer, which happens to give us 4 again. So we write this out. W squared plus 4w plus 4 minus 200 is equal to 0. Then we want to factorize these first 3 terms. And we happen to know, because we can see this 2 here from our first step, we happen to know that we can write this as w plus 2 squared minus 4 minus 200, so minus 204 is equal to 0. So this is turning point form. So we now have our turning point. Our turning point is equal to minus 2, because it's in brackets, minus 2 and negative 204. Now that one stays negative 204 because it's outside the brackets. Now, if we want to solve this question further to graph it, we then also need to find the x-intercepts. And how do we do that? Well, we can use difference of 2 squares. And the reason we can use difference of 2 squares is because if we look at the answer that we got here, there's a minus sign, so minus 204 between our 2 terms. That minus sign, that means we can factorize it further. So we're going to write this as w plus 2 squared minus the square root of 204 squared is equal to 0. Now, the square root of 204, I'm just going to do that on the calculator quickly. Normally, if we were going into math methods, we would be concerned about keeping it as a rational number. But for the sake of making it clear what's going on, I'm going to convert it to a decimal. So let's just going to bring up my calculator and find the square root of 204. And it turns out that is 14.28. So we can write this as w plus 2 squared minus 14.28 squared is equal to 0. We then know that we can write this as w plus 2 plus 14.28 times w plus 2 minus 14.28 is equal to 0. And we've got one more line on the page. So if we combine them together, we get w plus 16.28 times w minus 12.28 is equal to 0. And from this line, we can find our x-intercepts. Remember, there's 2 of them because I got 2 brackets. This one's going to be negative 16.28. comma 0. And this second one's going to be positive 12.28, comma 0. Now, the reason for flipping the signs, again, is because they're in brackets. And we want what's in the brackets to equal 0. So I should actually say this is not our x-intercepts, this is our w-intercepts, not our x-intercepts. And likewise, our y-intercept should actually be our a-intercept area, because we're dealing with area and width. So we've now got all the important information that we need to draw our graph. So let's draw our graph. And area is our y-axis and width is our x-axis. So we've got our intercept is 0, negative 200. That's way down here. 0, negative 200. Negative 2, negative 204. Okay, that's even further down here. That's negative 2, negative 204. And then we've got these 2 points. So negative 16.28. It's going to be over here. Negative 16.28, comma 0. And the other one was 12.28. So that's over here. Okay. Now if we look closely at that, we can see we've got the points. This one, this one, this one, and this one. We can see the shape should be a positive shape, but let's just check. If we look at our original equation, this one here, the way we can check if it's a positive shape is that a plus or a minus in front of the w squared, it's a plus because there is no minus. So that means it's a positive shape. So we know we've done it right, and we can just draw our graph. Now it's not a perfect graph, but it's generally the right shape. Got our turning point, y-intercept, 2 x-intercepts. And the original question, what was the original question? I want to find the amount of fencing. Well, to find the amount of fencing, we realized we need to know what the width is. Well, this is where we need to interpret our graph features. There's 2 options for our width. 12.28 or negative 16.28. If we remember the last video, we generally don't want the negative answer. We generally want only the positive answer. So that's 12.28 is the width that we're after. So in order to find the amount of fencing, we need to use this equation. The perimeter is equal to 4 times the width plus 8. So let's write that here. Perimeter is equal to 4 times by 12.28 plus 8. Let's write that plus 8. Okay, and if we were to do that on our calculator, we would get 57.12. Okay, so our answer is 57.12 meters. All right. At this point, I reckon you're probably thinking, wow, that is a lot of working out. Do I need to do that amount of working out every single time for every single application question? The answer is no, not always. You don't always need to. As you get more and more familiar with this process, you'll begin to realize what you need to do and what you don't need to do. So for example, in this case, I did completing the square, and I gave lots of working out. There are some steps in here, particularly in the difference of 2 squares, that once you become familiar with, you might choose to skip this step, for example, or one of the other steps, as long as you're not making mistakes through skipping them. If you're making mistakes, then don't skip them. So what I mean by that, if you notice that you're making mistakes by skipping steps, then just always write all the steps. But the other question would be, do I have to use completing the square? Because that's a lot of working out. The answer to that is no. as we'll see in the next video, we can use the quadratic formula. So in the next video, we'll do another example where we use the quadratic formula. I said I would do 2 examples in this video, but it's already been going for 20 minutes. So I'm going to stop it here, and we'll do the second example in a separate video where we see how to use the quadratic formula to save us a little bit of time. So I'll see you next video.